We've got a great show this episode, everything you ever wanted to know about owning a racing greyhound in the UK. George Sell joins us next on Greyhound Nation. This is Greyhound Nation, episode 34, recorded January 15th, 2023. Racing ownership in the UK with George Sell. Greyhound Nation is a podcast for greyhound enthusiasts produced by greyhound enthusiasts. To learn more about our show and its hosts, visit our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Greyhound Nation podcast. I'm Michael Burns. On this particular episode, you're not going to see John on the video because he took a spill at the farm. He's currently dealing with a black eye. However, the interview will go on. As John put it, he now officially has a face for radio. Without further ado, our host, John Parker.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome back, Greyhound lovers, to the best Greyhound podcast in the world. You know, a lot of folks don't like social media, decline to be on Facebook because of all the fluff and so forth that you see on it. But I've always enjoyed it because one of the things that's happened to me on Facebook is I've met some great Greyhound people. And among those are today's guest, George Sell. Welcome, George.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be on the podcast, although I have to say I'm slightly daunted to be following in the footsteps of Sir Mark Prescott and Charlie Blanning. Not only am I something of a Johnny-come-lately compared with them in greyhound terms, they're also two of the best storytellers you'll ever hear. So if we can make this episode as fraction as entertaining as theirs, then I'll be very happy.
Oh, well, they'll love to hear that. But your story is just as interesting as theirs in my view. So let's get right into it. Tell us a little bit about your background, what you do, where you live, and so forth, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you got into greyhounds and also whippets.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Cornwall in the far southwest of England. I moved to London at 19 to go to university, and I lived in London for 15 years or so, and since then I've been living in Hampshire with my wife. I'm a journalist and an event producer, and my wife Vicky is also a journalist and a very keen equestrian too. So we're very much a horses and hounds obsessed household.
Yeah, that's how we met. A lot of commonality. We both love greyhounds, horses, horse racing, and we're both horse husbands. So that's wonderful. I don't, and all the times we've talked about greyhounds and so forth, I don't think I've ever asked you exactly what the nature of your journalistic endeavors are. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'm one of the owners of a company called International Hospitality Media, and we publish B2B websites for the hospitality, travel and real estate sectors here in the UK and across Europe. But I've also done quite a lot of freelance writing for various newspapers, magazines and websites, predominantly on travel and real estate.
Excellent. Now, tell us about how you got into greyhounds. Was it whippets or greyhounds first?
Yeah, whippets was the gateway drug for me. I've always been a sighthound fan. I've kept and run whippets for quite a long time now. Used to go greyhound racing occasionally when I was a student. I used to go to Walthamstow, and living down here, we used to go to Wimbledon, which is fairly close. Both now sadly closed. And as you mentioned, social media has really been my way into greyhounds. I used to follow various groups on Facebook. And the first dog that I got involved with was actually a Facebook syndicate back in 2014, 2015. It was a dog who was running in Ireland. And I think there were probably around 10 of us in the syndicate. And the dog started off really well. He did some very nice trials around Tralee. And then he went to the trainer who was running the syndicate. And rather than training on, he just got worse and worse and worse. And no one could really understand why. And some of the people in the syndicate were getting rather upset with it and quite vocal in letting everybody know. I had actually persuaded a friend of mine who lives up the road from me, a guy called Ray Byrne, to come in on this Facebook syndicate to me. He doesn't do social media, but I kept him informed. I used to go around and show him what was going on. I think Ray's 88 now, and he's had a lot of greyhounds over the years. He's had some good ones. He's bred some good ones. And I knew that his last greyhound had retired a year or so before I got into this syndicate. So I thought that would be a nice way for him to have a small involvement. And we really liked this dog. He was one of the best looking greyhounds you'll ever see. He was called Steeple Road Teddy. A big, strapping big white dog with a red fawn kind of eye patch. It gave him a rather piratical look, a stunning dog. And we thought he still had potential. So one of the people that I'd met through Whippets was Kim Gooding, who was a very successful coursing trainer back in the day. In fact, her and her husband trained a Waterloo Cup winner in 1989, I think. And Kim had given up training greyhounds for quite a while, but she just was dipping her toe back in the water at this time. She was working as a kennel hand for a guy called Max Alden, and he was renting Kim's kennels, and she had a kind of couple of dogs in the kennel that she was doing and looking after herself. So I just had the brainwave to ask her if she fancied having a go with Teddy. So we brought him over from Ireland in the transporter. He settled in very well. Kim was training at Peterborough at the time, which is near where she lives, out in the Fens, in the east of England. And he settled in well, and we took him to the track for his first race, not really knowing what to expect. And I can remember the few seconds between the bell going and the traps opening being some of the most nerve-wracking of my entire life. I couldn't quite believe how involved I got. And he went and won, and he won really well. And I completely lost my composure and picked Kim up and whirled her around, and much to the bemusement of the other people at the track, because I think it was only an A7 or an A8 or something. It was hardly a Derby final. But if you could bottle what I felt at that point, you'd be a very rich man. He also won his second race just to make sure that I was well and truly hooked on the game. He had a reasonable career. We retired him with a minor wrist injury, and he now lives with a lovely lady called Barbara, who lives in Thetford Forest, and he lives with I think around 15 or 20 huskies and malamutes. So he's now an honorary sled dog. You have to look very hard at her pack and see his little head sticking out.
Does he ever get hitched up to the sled? Does he ever get hitched up to the sled, I wonder?
I don't think he does, because he's not short of dogs to do that. But she does she actually does the racing around Thetford Forest. They've got tracks. Obviously, it's not in snow. They have these kind of adapted kind of BMX bikes. They're trikes, actually, but they've got BMX handlebars and things. It looks good fun, actually. So yeah, Teddy has landed on his feet there. He's living his best life, as they say.
Well, you mentioned the syndicate. Let's talk a little bit about that. Pardon me. And is that a fairly typical way that kind of small owners get involved in greyhound racing and ownership of racing greyhounds?
I think it is now. Yeah, I think it's a relatively new phenomenon. As I say, I'm not somebody who comes from a greyhound family who's been in it generations. So that was my way in, really. And I think it increasingly is the way that people get involved. I mean, we'll probably go on and talk about our coffee shop syndicate later on, but there are I think there's a couple of first-time owners in there. I've got another syndicate that I'm setting up with, where the pup is in Ireland, just about to start schooling, and there's a couple of first-time owners there. So yeah, I think it is. It's a really productive way. Social media has a lot of negatives, but if you can tune those out and focus on the positives, I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. What just using Teddy as an example, what did it cost, expressed in pounds, you to get involved in that syndicate?
I honestly can't remember. It was It was slightly different in Ireland because the system over there is slightly different. I think it's only the first 2 or 3 in a race that win any prize money, and the also-rans don't. So that might be why people were getting fed up. They were talking through their pockets, perhaps, because he wasn't bringing in any money, and he was costing. But I think in general, I think the cost of having a dog in training in Ireland and in the UK is probably broadly similar, about £300 a month, I guess, roughly. And you divide that between however many of you are in the syndicate.
And that pays for the board and so forth. And then what happens when the dog begins to race? How do you divide up the winnings, if there are any, and how does that work?
Well, what I've always done is to any money that comes in, whether it's whether the dog wins or he's just picking up run money, I knock that off the bill. But I think what we're going to start doing from this month with our syndicate is put an extra £5 a month on everyone's bill and put that in a pot, just so we've got some money for if there are any unforeseen vet fees. The bitch pup will come in season at some point, so she won't be racing. So I think it's a good idea to do that. And then, maybe at the end of the racing career of these 2 pups, we'll have enough in there to buy another one if people still want to stay involved and keep going.
Yeah. Now, it works a little different in the UK in terms of the financial aspects of it. Here in the US, the dog is just leased to the kennel operator, and the kennel operator then pays all the expenses and takes 55-60% of the purse money when the dog wins by going first through fourth, and the owner gets the other part of the percentage. So there's a little bit of a different financial structure in the UK. Tell us about how that works.
Well, traditionally, most dogs have had owners, whether that's an individual or a partnership or a syndicate. And I think you'll find in most of the kennels of the top trainers, they'll still have the majority of dogs in the kennel with owners. But as there's been more and more racing and more low-end racing at all times of the day, we've increasingly seen trainers buying dogs, tracks buying dogs to give to trainers to run. And, they at that end of the market, they've become a bit commoditized, really. They're a product for the betting markets. There are some trainers who've got 80, 100 and more dogs. That's not the way I would choose to go. I'm quite particular about which trainers I put dogs with. We'll move on to this later, but the whole kind of attitude towards owners from the sport in general has changed quite a bit recently, I think.
How so?
Well, I think the pandemic was a catalyst for some quite sudden changes. If we take one track where we have runners, Henlow, for example, it used to be quite a social affair going there on a Sunday. There was a good open card on a Sunday afternoon. The restaurant there was open. It did decent food. You'd get a Sunday roast or fish and chips. You'd see lots of people there. And it was a good social experience. But in common with a lot of businesses in the hospitality sector, since the pandemic, the tracks seem to have found it very difficult to hire staff to handle that side of the operation. I think they've realised they're making enough money with the broadcasting rights to the racing that the bookmakers pay for. That's profitable in and of itself, and they don't seem overly keen to get owners and well, not just owners but race goers back. If you go to Henlow on a Sunday now, you might see half a dozen owners there if you're lucky, and most of them are from the same owners at the same kennel in my experience. So yeah, that's been slightly depressing, if I'm honest. There's nothing better than a packed terrace and a great atmosphere and a roar when the dogs are going by. But you don't get that very often unless you go racing on a weekend evening. one of the things I loved about Peterborough when I first went racing, they only raced 3 days a week, and they were on a Wednesday evening, a Friday evening, and a Saturday evening. And if my dog was running on a Wednesday, I could watch it on the Racing Post Greyhound TV channel, and if it was on a Friday or a Saturday, I'd go along and watch, and it was always packed. But Peterborough was actually the first casualty of the pandemic, because they were pretty much the only track that wasn't reliant on the broadcasting money. They were quite an old-fashioned business, I guess, in that way. Even though it was very profitable, they made their money from footfall through the door and selling food and drink. And when that dried up in the pandemic, they fairly quickly took the decision to close, which is a real shame.
What are you hearing about whether the old model, such as at Henlow, will return? Do you think this is the new normal, or do you think it'll come back once the staffing problems are solved?
I don't know. I hope it's not the new normal, but I've got a sneaking feeling it might be. I mean, there are a few bright spots on the horizon. So the same promoter who's got Henlow, Kevin Boothby, has recently reopened Oxford track, and they run an open card every Friday night, which is quite popular. I went to the first night there, and that was absolutely packed, and that had a real good buzz there. I think they had a couple of issues with the catering that took them a while to iron out, but there are a few bright spots, and I think it's still a very marketable sport, I think, but the sport does very, very little indeed to market itself. What I think is really needed is a kind of generic promotional and marketing campaign for the sport from all the main stakeholders, so the bookmakers, the GBGB, which is the governing body, and the promoters. The people who run the tracks, they're termed promoters, but some of them do very, very little in the way of promotion. But if they could get together and chuck a few quid into a central marketing and promotional fund, which is what they do in horse racing, which is facing some similar issues to greyhound racing, I think it could do the world of good. One of the things we're up against is the anti-greyhound racing lobby over here are really well organised, and they're very good on social media. They're very effective, and people tend to believe them because they don't hear an alternative point of view from the racing community. And I just think we need to do a bit more to show the good side of the sport, to show how well the dogs are looked after, kennel visits, this kind of stuff. All the things that horse racing are doing, it's not rocket science, but I really think it can be done. And I think the appetite is out there. A recent example, darts is a massively popular sport here in the UK, believe it or not. And there was I think there was the World Championships a week or two ago, which had massive viewing figures, and it ended with some, apparently it was one of the best games of darts ever played, and the world champion and the guy who did what has now become a fairly iconic piece of commentary for it are greyhound racing fans. The commentator bought a dog recently and placed it with Matt Dartnell, who's a trainer that I've had dogs with, and it won first time out at Oxford last week, and he's got a big social media following, this guy, and he was tweeting and everything about this dog, and there was loads of interaction, far more than I've ever seen for anything generated from within the sport about the sport. So, and it was all good stuff. So it can be done. I just think it needs a bit of thought and a bit of strategy behind it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how the parallels between UK and American racing. We said for years they needed a national PR campaign, and they didn't do it. And here we're down to 2 tracks. Hopefully the British authorities and the British racing community will see that, let's don't go the way of the Americans, and let's get a national PR campaign going and talk about the dogs and the sport. People love dogs, and that's the hook.
Yeah.
And so let's just fingers crossed that the British folks, figure out that that's what they need to do.
Well, the governing body for horse racing here has set up quite a big dedicated marketing department called Great British Racing, and they're doing a really good job. And I think one of the things that could be done is to re-establish the links between horse racing and greyhound racing, because they used to be very strong. A lot of horse racing trainers used to keep greyhounds. All the guys, the two main horse, well, actually there are three main horse racing centres in the UK, but there are two in the south. It's Newmarket and Lambourne. And a lot of trainers at Newmarket used to run dogs at Mildenhall, which is just down the road. And a lot of trainers in the Lambourne area used to run at Swindon and Oxford and Reading. And, I think that's a no-brainer to try and re-establish that link, because I think people who are into horse racing are halfway to being greyhound racing fans if they can find out a bit more about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you referenced Sunday open cards. For our American listeners and viewers that may not be familiar with that, tell us about what an open card is.
Yeah, okay, so an open race is, well, let's start at the beginning. With very few exceptions, each trainer is contracted to run at a particular track. So they have to supply a certain amount of numbers each month, according to their contract for that track. And when they start, a new dog or a young dog, they'll unless they're very, very good, they'll usually start in graded racing. And graded racing, depending on the track, can start at A11, A10, A9. And if you win an A11, then you go up to A10, and you keep going until you get to the top of the tree, which is A1. Open racing is a race at a particular track that any trainer can enter from whichever track they are attached to. So with a few exceptions, that tends to be, the very top end of the dogs. So you have maiden opens for dogs that haven't won an open race before. You have one-off opens, and then you have your competitions, which have several rounds and a final. But open racing, in general, is the best racing with the best dogs.
Yeah, and that's why they reserve it for weekends and when they're going to have the bigger crowds and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, until fairly recently, the big competitions used to be shown on television as well on Sky Sports, which again generated a big audience. But that hasn't happened for a few years now, and that I'm sure getting back on there would really help boost the sport, because it's a good sport to promote, and it should be an easy sport to promote. The dogs are great characters. There's some great human characters in the game. It's exciting. I think the potential is there. It just needs somebody to take it by the scruff of the neck and make it happen, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go back a little bit to your history of greyhound racing after Teddy. What was your next foray into greyhound ownership?
Well, it's a dog that you're very familiar with, John. I was scouring the Greyhound Data website, which is, it's very interesting. You spend a bit of time on there looking at the adverts, and you try and filter through the shorthand of what people actually mean, and you can either turn up a real gem on there, or you can really overpay for something very moderate. I was lucky in that I saw an advert for a dog called Oliver Jackson, and I phoned the owner and breeder, who was a lady called Natalie Abadi over in County Cavan in Ireland, and their setup is called Jack's Kennels. I picked up the phone expecting to hear a thick Irish brogue at the other end of the phone, so I was quite surprised when I heard a German accent talking back at me. But we got on pretty well, and we did a deal. She gave me a bit of discount off the price that Oliver was advertised for, and he came over to Kim Gooding again, settled in very quickly, and he was a terrific little dog. He won a lot of races around Peterborough. He was very consistent. He won 3 races in a row at one point, and he won the Racing Post TV Performance of the Week for all the tracks in England one week. And he was, as you know, he's only a little dog. He ran at 62-pound racing weight, but a terrific never say die attitude. Chasing as hard as he possibly could every race. He was a super little dog, and Yeah, well, John, you might want to elaborate a bit more about him because you know more about him than I do.
Well, for our listeners, this is really where George and I got to know each other best, I think. George rehomes, if I'm not mistaken here, George, you rehome all your Greyhounds directly. You
The majority
deal
of them,
directly
yeah.
with the adopter. So George put up his on his Facebook page that he had a nice Greyhound who was ready to retire, had a little wrist injury, and I saw it, and I contacted George privately and said, "Hey, George, I really like the look of Oliver. I like his size very much because I'm very much into moderately sized Greyhounds instead of some of these big behemoths that are being bred these days." And said, "How about it if you rehome him with us and we'll breed him?" I had a nice coursing bred female I wanted to breed him to, and George said, "Yeah, that's great." So Oliver came over to join us about 5 years ago, I think now, wasn't it, George?
Yeah.
And he lives here with us. He's been a great addition to our pack. He's a lovely little dog. He makes us laugh about every day with something he does.
He's a character.
And he's bred a couple of litters who have all done well in amateur sports. So Oliver's been a great addition to our pack and our household. And I'm glad that you got him from Natalie and that he did well for you. Then you kind of established a relationship with Natalie after that. Is that right?
Yeah. It was really fortunate actually to get to know them kind of early in my Greyhound journey because I've subsequently had quite a few dogs from those guys, and they've become good friends. Natalie, our mum Eva, and Beatrice Steiner is also part of the setup, who was a trainer in Ireland. They're actually scaling down their breeding program a bit now. Natalie is another horse fanatic, and she's doing a bit of retraining of horses now as well. So she's taking a step back a bit from the Greyhounds, but they've become good friends, and I've been over to visit them several times to see my pups being reared and schooled and gone racing, and yeah, had a great time. They've been important in my Greyhound experience, and I've had some really nice dogs from them, including the best dog that I've owned to date, who was a big blue dog called Blue Montague, who he had quite an interesting career, really. He was a big, gangly pup who, if he was a human, he's the sort of person you'd say he could start a fight in a phone box. He wasn't a fighter on the track, but he was just like a bull in a china shop. You know, if there was trouble to be found in the race, he would find it. But he had masses of ability. He started off at Peterborough, which was a very tight 435 metre track, which really didn't suit him at all. He wanted a big old galloping track. So I kind of looked around to try to figure out where would be the best place for him to run, and I settled on Hove, which was quite close to me down on the south coast here. I had a couple of friends who had dogs with Matt Dartnell, who was training at Hove at the time. So I kind of, I mean, Matt and his dad Terry are in the top drawer trainers. They've been very successful all over the years. So it was more of a case of them vetting me rather than me vetting them to get the dog there. But they decided to take a chance on Monty because he had won six-pen staying race at Peterborough, which he won really nicely. And I had always had the feeling that he had masses of stamina and he'd make a stayer. He took a little while to get going at Hope, but when he did, he really took off. He won several open races over 695 and 740 metres. He ran in a couple of competitions. He was a super dog. And he's also now very happily retired, living on a sofa in Essex.
Yeah, I followed Monty myself, as you recall. We even thought about maybe bringing him over to the U.S. And when he was ready to retire, we were not ready to add another dog. But I'm glad to hear that he's had a good retirement. He was fun to watch. He was a lot of fun to watch the races.
If he had any track craft, John, he would have been a world beater. But he had absolutely none.
Now. Tell us a little bit about the trainer's role and how you picked them. I know you said that Matt Darnell had to vetted you more than you vetted him because of his record and so forth. But how do you go about, what do you look for in a trainer? And tell us a little bit about your thoughts about the trainer's role in the dog's success?
Yeah, well, I think I've had my own dogs with 4 different trainers, and I've had one that I had a little interest in that was moved to another one. But I like to go on word of mouth. I like to speak to people I trust and who have had dogs with trainers, and ask them to tell me what they're like. I like to go and see the setup, to make sure it's clean and well run. I would never want to put a dog with a trainer who's got hundreds and hundreds of dogs, because I like my dog to have a bit of personal attention, whether they're a low-end grade or an open dog. I think they all deserve that. And so the trainers I've had dogs with over the years have been Jason Bloomfield and Kelly, his assistant trainer. I've had quite a few with them. I really like the way they train. The individual attention to the dog is definitely there. Kelly in particular is a very, very good communicator. So with our syndicate, she's conscious that you guys want to be kept updated. So she's always keeping me updated with pictures and videos, and they're really good. You're always welcome to go up there and walk the dogs and have a chat. It feels like some trainers don't have a lot of time for you, but I think, traditionally in the kind of old days, Sunday morning was kennel day, where owners would all descend on the kennels. You'd have a bacon sandwich and a cup of tea and a chat and walk your dogs. I don't think that happens so much now, which is a shame. At the Dartnell's kennel, it certainly does. You're always welcome at Kelly's place, and that's a big part of it. Some trainers, I do think there are trainers out there who still look at the dogs as commodities. They, particularly if they're not especially gifted and they're running at the lower end. They don't spend a great deal of time on them. Another trainer I've had dogs with is Ben McBride. He's moved back to Ireland now, but I had a few people interested in a dog who were all living around the Swindon area where he was training, and I knew a couple of people who had dogs with him who gave him a very good reference. So I made a call to go along and see him, and I thought I'd spend half an hour there and have a quick look around and have a chat, and ended up there probably 2 hours. Ben can talk. Ben can really talk. We got on very well, but the thing that I really liked was that practically the whole time I was talking to him, he had his hands on a dog. He was grooming them. He was doing their teeth. He was cutting their nails. He was rubbing them down. Nearly the whole time I was there. The dogs all looked terrific, and you could just tell the way he was with them. They were all the dogs were very relaxed. They were very calm, even when they were having their nails done, which, as you know, some of them really don't like at all. Just the way he was with the dogs, you could tell he was great with them. It's a family-run kennel. His wife and his kids were also involved, and I just kind of knew straight away that I'd be happy to put a dog there. I did visit a couple of other trainers where I didn't end up placing dogs for one reason or another. Something about their setup didn't really appeal. Matt Dartnell, I've already mentioned. The dogs at his place are absolutely immaculate. I don't know why open greyhound racing doesn't have a best turned out prize like horse racing does, but if they did, Matt would be taking home a lot of those. And Kim Gooding as well. Her dogs always look great. Her kennel is fantastic. It's a great setup. She's had a lot of experience. The dogs get a lot of variety in their routine and their work. They get a lot of turnout time, and they're happy. When somebody comes along, they're excited. They get up and bark for a couple of minutes, and then it's completely silent. They're all back. They're all settled down and asleep again. They're very, very contented and well looked after dogs. So that's the welfare of the dogs is really important. I want the dogs to be happy where they are, and the whole experience is important to me. It's not just about racing. I like being around greyhounds. I like being around greyhound people. I like the social side of it. I like walking the dogs with other owners on a Sunday morning and having a cup of tea and a bit of banter. It's all part of the experience, and that to me is as important as going racing.
I want to talk a little bit more about that great tradition, the Sunday morning tradition you mentioned.
Yeah.
And for our American listeners who may not know, In the UK, the dogs don't live at the track in a racing kennel compound. They live with the trainer in his or her facility, and the trainer's home is usually there as well as the kennels, and they have the paddocks and the gallops and so forth. Talk a little bit about that Sunday morning tradition. So any owner can go, assuming pre-arrangements are made with the trainer, and it's just an opportunity to spend time one-on-one or one-on-two or one-on-three, how many ever dogs you may have with them, walking them yourself around their facility and so forth. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the Dartnell Kennel is a good case in point. If you let them know you're coming on a Sunday morning, everybody turns up around the same time. Once all the once all the morning feed and let out has been done, there'll usually be sausage rolls and maybe some biscuits and some cake and lots of cups of tea, and you'll have a chat. And then your individual dog will be brought out of kennels. In my case, it was Monty, and he would be on two legs like a kangaroo, bouncing down the path, full of the joys of spring. And then you take them over the road. They've got a nice big paddock and a gallop over the road from the house and the kennel. You'd go over there and have a yarn. If you've got a good dog that's open class, you might have a chat with Matt about maybe where you want to aim him or her for their next race, and it's just really good fun. It's really good fun, and the social side of it is really important. I think Terry, Matt's dad, is a fantastic raconteur. He's very entertaining. He's been in the game a long time. He's got some terrific stories as well, and it's if you have a dog that wins a good race, an open race, if you're particularly lucky, Terry will cook you pancakes on a Sunday morning. That's the kind of ritual after a big winner the night before. Is it? TD will cook you some pancakes, which is a seal of approval.
Yeah, that's great. To the extent that greyhound racing may come back in America, boy, wouldn't that be a wonderful model to follow over here? Is to have that kind of Sunday morning. You could even do it in a racing kennel setting. It would be a little more difficult, but it could be done where the owners come to get together and chat with the trainer and visit with the dogs and so forth. There's so many people that I think would get into a greyhound racing ownership if they could do that, if they could have an opportunity to really spend one-on-one time up close and personal with the dogs and socialize with the other owners.
I guess the kennels where it's done right, it's quite similar to how a racehorse yard would treat owners. It's a similar kind of thing there. And I suppose there are parallels again between the way it is here and the way in the States. Because if I've got this correct, most racehorses live at the tracks as well, don't they, in the US?
Yes. Yeah. They have the stables, behind the track.
Yeah, which again is different here. They tend to be at their own particular yards and then travel to the track.
Yeah, we experienced that with Sir Mark Prescott with horses. We just happened to be there in Newmarket, and he had invited us. We didn't know we didn't know about this tradition of Owner Sunday, and so we appear at Heath House, and several other people did, and so Sir Mark takes us all up to the gallops, and a couple of the ladies didn't have appropriate shoes. He loaned them some boots and just basically entertained and talked about the horses. And we met some really interesting folks. So it's just the same kind of concept with Greyhound. That's a great tradition.
Well, he famously telephones every single one of his owners every Sunday, doesn't he?
Yes.
Must take a while.
When he was here, 2005. I'll just digress just a second. For our ASFA National Greyhound Specialty Lure Coursing meeting, he was a guest in our home, and he got up at like 3 o'clock in the morning because of the time difference on a Sunday morning. We didn't even know he was doing it. He was up in his bedroom doing it with his cell phone, calling every owner, and he still does it. So that's a great tradition to follow. What about when you're not there on Sundays? What are kind of the accepted forms of communication with the trainer if he has a question or wants to talk with you about the next race, or maybe something's going wrong with the dog, anything like that? How is that typically done? Is that more phone calls or more email, or how's it done?
these days it's a lot on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or whatever, or if it's something more important, it's a phone call. If it's bad news, it tends to be a phone call. But yeah, WhatsApp I would guess more than anything, because you can, they can send you pictures and videos very quickly, so that tends to be the main way to do it. But I like to have a chat with all my trainers on the phone, every couple of weeks, just for a catch up if I haven't seen them.
Now let's talk a little bit about, you referenced our coffee shop syndicate. In full disclosure to our listeners, I'm a member of that syndicate. This came from your getting into doing some breeding yourself, right?
Well, I haven't been hugely hands-on in the process, but I bought a really nice little bitch called Marine Magic from Natalie, and she won quite a lot of races around Peterborough. She was really nicely bred, and Natalie always had a soft spot for her and said she'd like to have her back for breeding when the time comes. And so she did all the hard work. She arranged the mating. She did all the rearing. Normally, when I've had dogs from her in the past, they've been fully schooled as well by the time they get here. But for one reason or another, that didn't happen this time. So so two of the pups were I kept, and she kept the rest herself. So we've got a dog and a bitch. They came over in September, I think, and they were absolutely feral. They were wild creatures. They'd never been on a lead. They didn't know what on earth was going on, and I think Jason and Kelly were slightly taken aback when they arrived. But they've got the hang of things pretty quickly, actually, and they've both won races now, as you know. Esther won the other day, and I was having terrible trouble coming up with names for them that hadn't already been used before, because I had to register them with the ICC, the Irish Coursing Club, which is because they were bred in Ireland, and it seems like nearly every word in the English language is somebody's prefix in Ireland. So to come up with some names that hasn't got somebody's prefix in is quite difficult. And I made myself a good strong coffee and sat down for some inspiration, and that kind of got me going. So the dog became Macchiato, and the bitch originally was called Espresso, which I was quite pleased to get, and their pet names are Mac and Esther, and they came as a result of those two names. And then when they came over and had to be registered for racing in the UK, it turns out there'd already been an Espresso here, so we had to change her name to Americano, which actually was quite appropriate because half of our syndicate members actually are in the States, so that worked out quite well. But they're still very young. They're June 21 pups. They're starting at the lower end of the grading spectrum, but considering how little they've done, they had no schooling. They went straight into hand slips and then trials at the track. So usually when you buy a dog from Ireland, it knows the score. It's been around and had quite a lot of unofficial trials, and these dogs have done absolutely nothing. So yeah, they both won a race already, and they're going in the right direction. So it's it's fun. And going back to the social media side of things, I wanted to get people involved. The kind of economic climate here is hitting everyone. Nobody's got as much disposable income as they used to have, myself included. I cut down a fair bit on what I spend on greyhounds, and I thought it would be quite a nice thing to do to set up a similar syndicate to the one that we had with going back to the very first dog, Teddy. And do that. So with Kelly's help, she's very good on social media. With Kelly's help and some posts on the Greyhound Facebook page, we got together 10 like-minded souls, and yeah, we're having fun. It's nice. I enjoy running it, and I enjoy keeping people in the loop. It was a bit of a leap of faith for everyone, because we had no idea whether these pups could run, or if they could run, how good they were going to be, and we still don't know how good they're going to be. I don't think we're going to have a Derby winner on our hands, John, but I'm enjoying it. I get the impression everyone else is enjoying it, and it's a nice way to do things, and it's low cost for everyone involved.
Yeah. So you basically just put a post out on various Facebook groups, including the Greyhound, and said we're forming a syndicate, and who wants to play? Is that about the way it worked?
Pretty much. You always get a few people who mess you about, and a few people inquired who, let's say, I knew of by reputation, and I didn't particularly want them to get involved. But with a little bit of trial and error, we've got some really nice people involved. Everyone who's involved in this syndicate is either somebody that I knew, or somebody who has previously had dogs with the trainer. So there was 1 or 2 degrees of separation, but there's nobody there who was a complete stranger. So I knew a little bit about everyone, one way or another. So a bit of a gamble, but it's really paid off. I'm having fun doing it, and I hope you are as well.
Absolutely. What's the American British breakdown in terms of there's 10 in the syndicate, right?
Yeah, it's
Is that correct?
5 each, so we're straight down the middle.
And tell us how you came up with the name, the Coffee Shop Syndicate. How did you come up with that name?
Well, just because it fitted the theme with the dogs' names. So, if we end up getting more dogs, eventually I'm going to have to come up with even more obscure types of coffee to name them. But I guess the kind of Facebook page for the syndicate is where we all hang out. Maybe an online version of a coffee shop, perhaps.
Yeah, that's right. So talk a little bit about for folks that have never been in a syndicate and don't really have much history with it. Just using the Coffee Shop Syndicate as an example, how does it work financially? How do you physically? What are the mechanics of handling the financial aspects of it?
So this one was a little unusual in that there was no cost to buy the dogs. The dogs were mine, and I didn't charge anybody a buy-in fee. So everyone who's been involved has just had to pay their 10% share of the costs involved in getting the dogs across from Ireland, getting them registered, getting them schooled, and getting them up and running. So basically how it works is I get a bill every month from the trainer. I pay the bill, and then every syndicate member gives me 10% of that bill. So I'm one of the 10, so I pay the same as everybody else. We each pay 10%. And then from next month, we're just going to add £5 a month each on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, just so we've got a contingency fund in there for vet fees or whatever if they're needed. So it's pretty simple. The bill comes in and divide it by 10, and that's what everybody pays. And the training fee is £300 a month. Little extras on top of that may involve a physio visit. I think the physio comes every 2 weeks, so the dogs get a real good check over by a guy called Robert Meek, who comes from a real old, established and successful greyhound family over in the west of England. If they travel to open races, then you usually will pay travel to open racing, or if they trial another track with a view to running in an open race, because you wouldn't normally want to run a dog in a race at a track without it having a look round first, then that would go on. And the only other expenditure might be any vet treatment if that's needed. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward.
But their board includes obviously their life at the kennel, their exercise, and their feeding.
Yeah.
And then you net out of that £300 per month per dog their winnings, of course.
Yeah. So they're at the moment, they're running at the kind of lower end at Henlow. So if they win a race, it's about £100, but they get £40 run money just for running. So if they get 4 runs a month, for example, then they bring in £160 each.
So that's just for showing up, so to speak, just for being entered and running.
Yeah.
£40 per dog per race.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another feature that they have in the UK that we don't have here in the US. If the dog doesn't place first through fourth, he goes home empty, so to speak.
Yeah. There is a school of thought here that if a dog is racing regularly, it should, whether it wins or not, it should be bringing in enough to cover the bills. I've never really subscribed to that school of thought, because to me it's a hobby. I don't expect to have my hobbies paid for by somebody else. I expect to have to spend my own money on my hobby. There are people who aren't of that way of thinking, but as long as they're covering a chunk of it and it's not costing me an arm and a leg, I don't mind. The prize money hasn't gone up very much in the time I've been in the game, if at all. So, I was never really involved in the sport in what you could call the golden years. So people who have been in the game for a long time, I do understand why they're fed up with the state of play at the moment. But it's not an expensive hobby really, especially not if you have a syndicate with a decent number of you in.
Yeah, they've always said the Greyhound is the poor man's racehorse.
Yeah, exactly.
So for those that couldn't afford to get to have a racehorse, or maybe even being a syndicate owning a racehorse, Greyhounds are a nice alternative with a lot of the same social aspects and hobby aspects that racehorse ownership would have.
Yeah, but if I could afford a racehorse, I'd still keep Greyhounds as well.
You have other horse expenses, don't you?
I do, yeah. We have. Well, my wife has a show jumper and also a really nicely bred young show jumping prospect who's still out in the field waiting to be broken when the clocks go forward in the spring. So yeah, those expenses are probably more than my Greyhound expenses, I should say.
And I'm sure you remind her of that from time to time.
Actually.
Talk a little bit about the actual ownership. For example, with our two coffee shop Greyhounds, who's actually the legal owner as far as the registries are concerned?
They are owned by the coffee shop syndicate, of which I am the lead member. So I'm the kind of point of contact for the GBGB. So I'm responsible for them. So when they finish racing, actually let's go forward a bit. So when you start a dog over here racing, you have to pay £200 bond money for each dog, which goes into a kitty, and then when they retire, the governing body, the GBGB, will match that money. So if the dogs go to a rehoming centre, then they receive £400 from the GBGB to cover their costs, hopefully while the dog is with them until it finds a home. There is quite a big backlog of dogs waiting to be rehomed at the moment, so in some cases probably that £400 doesn't cover that cost. And I have in a couple of cases used those rehoming centres, and I've topped up that money and gave them a bit extra because the dog's been there for a while. But it's quite a nice initiative, and again, some people don't like it. They don't feel like they should pay it, but it's they've spent over £1 million, I think, the GBGB have on this scheme. They've given out, and I think the rehoming rate here now is something like 94 to 95% of dogs that are suitable for rehoming are being rehomed after racing. One of the things that the anti-racing lobby always come up with is that when they finish and they're no longer earning us pots of money, they get put down, or when they get injured, they get put down, and as a matter of routine. Things have moved on so far since that was the case. Back in the dark old days, it really isn't like that anymore. But as I mentioned earlier, the industry has been terrible about getting the message out about how much welfare has improved. There are some other quite good initiatives, like the GBG. If your dog has a career-ending injury at the track, the GBGB will pay half of your vet bills for that, and a lot of the tracks will pay the other half. Not all, but a lot of the tracks will pay the other half. So that there's a lot that needs to be improved, but the welfare standards, by and large, are streets ahead of where they were. But we're not very good at telling people about it.
Yeah. So I don't really own of either Mac or Esther. I don't own like a tail or a front leg, or I just own an undivided 1/10 of each dog as a member of the syndicate.
Well, if you like to Bagsy one particular bit of their anatomy, John, you can definitely have it. But
Now, what? Just looking ahead, what? Just as using again the coffee shop dogs as an example, what will happen when they retire, and maybe if there's no decision made to breed them, where do they go?
It's a good question, and there are several possibilities for them. I don't think they'll be bred from. I don't think they're going to be of a high enough standard to breed from, as the vast majority of greyhounds aren't. In an ideal world, one of the syndicate members might like to take them home. I've got a friend who is not really into greyhound racing but loves greyhound, and has seen pictures of Esther, and she's already taken a bit of a shine to her. So she may have a potential home there. I don't know. I'd like to think we can rehome them ourselves with the social media networks that we've got between us all. I'd prefer to do it that way. Kelly is very involved in rehoming. She's really good. She doesn't only rehome her own dogs either. She also helps out other trainers, and she runs a Facebook page dedicated to that. So just by virtue of being in Jason's kennel, they've got a better chance of being rehomed directly than going into a rehoming centre. However, if that's not possible, then they will go to a rehoming centre. The £400 bond for each dog will go to that rehoming centre, and they will live there in a very similar setup to a racing kennel, actually, except there's not so much emphasis on fitness. But most of these rehoming centres are in former racing kennels. In fact, the one that Kelly and Jason use a lot, I think, is in Gary Kelly's former kennels up at Waltham Abbey in Essex. So that's still a greyhound kennels. It's not used for racing, but it's a rehoming.
Wow, that's great. Gary Kelly, the Waterloo Cup slipper, and later a racing greyhound trainer himself.
Yeah. And those guys do a fantastic job. They're really dedicated. There are actually two kennels on the same road there, two rehoming centres. One called Barley and one called Whittingham, and they're both very, very good. They both do a super job. So they will probably end up at one of those two rehoming centres if we can't rehome them. And both are very good at social media. Both have open days. Both have fundraisers, and they have a lot of people in and out, and they're very good at matching the right dog with the right home. Esther will probably go before Mac because she's small and she's a girl. They tend to be easier to rehome. But yeah, you never know. But they'll be in good hands wherever they go. I'd like to think we'd be able to do it ourselves, John. But if we can't, then they will be going to the next best option, which is one of these fantastic rehoming centres.
Yeah. Well, I'll make a prediction that between the 10 owners, somebody is going to want one or both of them. I think that's probably, after you've watched your dog race and so forth. Of course, there's some expenses involved if it was one of the American members in getting them over here, but that's not insurmountable. And so that's my prediction. I think they'll both end up with syndicate members. We'll see what happens.
I hope so. I can tell already they'll both make really good pets. They're both lovely natured dogs. They're very confident. They're very affectionate. They'll be super pets. So it'll be nice if that does happen.
What's your next? What do you think your next step is after this syndicate? Are the two dogs in the syndicate the current two dogs you own on the track now, or do you have others?
They're the only two I have racing at the moment. I've got a really exciting puppy in Ireland who's turning a year old next week, who I've got a syndicate of 6 with him. He'll be going to Matt Dartnell. He is a dog pup by Droopy Sydney, who is the absolute sire sensation of the moment. If you look at the results in Ireland and the UK, he's absolutely dominating all the top races. He's been a phenomenon the last 2 or 3 years. And he's out of a bitch called Away Shelley, which Matt Dartnell trained, which was a Cat 1 competition winner. She's thrown some nice pups already, and hoping that Sydney can sprinkle his magic dust on her, and he might be something a bit special. He looks the part. I just had a picture from Matt last week. He looks terrific, and as I say, I've got 5 other people in that dog with me, and we're called the Horse and Hound 6 Syndicate because everybody has got a connection with both dogs and horses in one way or another. So a good friend of mine from the Whippet world who actually bred one of my Whippets. We've got a guy called Colin Brown who's a former jockey. He used to ride a racehorse called Desert Orchid, who's one of the most famous steeplechasers here in England in the 80s. He's a great guy. He's got several Whippets. He's got a brother to one of mine. We've got a point-to-point trainer. So it's a really nice bunch of people, and I think hopefully we're going to have some fun with that dog. He's going to be starting off at Oxford, the recently reopened Oxford track, which is quite close for all of us in the syndicate to get to. So
yeah,
I think we're going to have some fun with him. He's called.
Did you mention his name? I may have missed it. What's the Greyhound's registration?
He's called the Longfellow. Sorry, he's called Longfellow, and he's named after Lester Piggott, the jockey. When I was trying to think of the name for him, it was around the time that Lester died, and so his kennel name is Lester. He's called Longfellow, which was Lester Piggott's nickname. So again, another horsey connection with the dog.
So his call name is Lester.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. Well, I hope you'll, when he starts racing, I hope you'll post on the Greyhound when he has a win or when he starts racing. It'd be fun, even though for those of us that aren't syndicate members of that syndicate, it would be fun to follow his career.
Yeah, I'll definitely. I'll keep you posted. And as I say, John, there's a lot over here in the sport that could be improved. But I think at its essence, it's a fantastic sport and it's got huge potential. I still get a massive buzz out of it. It does feel occasionally like the sport keeps shooting itself in the foot. But I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm hoping that it's going to be onwards and upwards.
So it sounds like you're going nowhere in terms of getting out of it. You plan to always have dogs for the foreseeable future. Greyhounds, I'm talking about. You've got your Whippets there at home.
At certain points, I've had interest in 7 or 8 dogs at a time. I don't think that'll ever happen again. I think 3 or 4 tops will be the way forward. There are quite a lot of people getting out of ownership, which is a shame. Some long-standing owners, some big owners. There are also quite a few people here who have started buying dogs to race in Ireland and even in Australia, actually, in some cases. We kind of look to Australia with a very envious glance because the sport is so well run and well funded and well marketed over there. There's an example of what it could be. Obviously there are some differences in that they got quite a bit more unused land to build on, and that kind of thing. But it's just so professional over there, and the way the sport is funded. There's a compulsory levy, so a certain percentage of all prize money gets invested back into the sport, and they have several races a year with $1 million prize money. And there's a Greyhound this year who is on course to become the first ever Greyhound to win $2 million in prize money. It's another world, John, compared with it over here.
I saw an article recently. They just passed the $10 billion, what we call handle here in America, but the $10 billion betting revenue mark. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean the betting revenue here is quite substantial, but the amount that comes back to the sport is fairly paltry, and it's only a voluntary thing. There isn't a compulsory levy from betting turnover, and I think that's probably the single biggest thing that could be done to improve the sport here. mean, Ireland is very different from here. I really like a lot about the Irish setup. There are a lot of people, a lot of hobbyist greyhound owner/stroke trainers. There are an awful lot of people there who might have 2, 4, 5 greyhounds in a kennel in the backyard, and some of them do very well. And it's very much part of the culture of rural Ireland. It's nice to see, but at the top end, out there, the prize money is really good, and if you've never been racing at Shelbourne Park in Dublin, on a Saturday night, then you should put it on your bucket list, because it's fantastic. It really is great.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? The model is out there for success. The Irish folks have shown us, the Australian folks have shown us, and it's just simply a matter of following that to the extent possible and taking pages out of their books. It just seems so obvious that it's frustrating sometimes that's not done. Particularly Irish here in the U.S.
And we'll never be able to replicate the Irish situation here, because it's the organisation that runs greyhound racing in Ireland is a semi-state body. It's a state-funded body, which that will never happen here. We wouldn't be able to replicate the Irish model. I mean, but it just shows you how ingrained greyhound racing is in Irish life. But I think a version of the Australian system with a compulsory levy and a decent percentage of betting turnover reinvested in the sport would be the way to go. Whether it will ever happen or not, I don't know. I'd have to say I doubt it, but that would be the single biggest thing we could do to improve the sport in the UK, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, George, it's been a great hour or so talking. It's very enjoyable to hear about what I call small ownership in the UK. I think that may be the way of the future, to get more and more folks involved. It started here, and there's still a little bit of it where people who started in greyhound adoption, for example, get into ownership. And I think your model of what you followed, do it as a hobby, do it for fun, the social aspect. I think that's a great way to enjoy racing greyhound ownership.
Well, thanks, John. It's been great to talk to somebody about greyhounds for an hour and not see their eyes glaze over. So it's been a treat.
Thanks again for joining us, and George, we'll look to hear back from you with the new dog and how he goes.
Will do. I'll keep you informed. Thanks, John.
And folks, thanks for joining us. Thanks to George Self for being our guest today, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Greyhound Nation.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're not a regular listener, be sure to follow Greyhound Nation wherever you get your podcasts. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Grey Nation Show, follow us, and you'll get notifications every time we release a new episode. You can also get new show notifications when you subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you liked the episode, leave us a review on our Facebook page or your favorite podcast app. You can also send us feedback or questions via the contact form on our website at greyhoundnation.dog. That's greyhoundnation.dog. This episode was produced in collaboration with host John Parker. Our theme music was composed and performed by Dimitri Taras. We'd like to thank our guest this episode, George Sell. If you have questions about racing syndicates, feel free to reach out to us via Facebook or our website. I'm Michael Burns, and you've been listening to Greyhound Nation.